This is the Fertility Friday podcast, episode number 29. Welcome to the 29th episode of the Fertility Friday podcast. Thank you for joining me today. I'm Lisa from fertilityfriday.com, and this is your source for information about the fertility awareness method and all things fertility. So I just wanted to start today by saying a special thank you for all the listeners who've been reaching out to me on Facebook and commenting in the show notes. I absolutely love hearing from you. It's so encouraging for me to know that this podcast is truly helping women to discover fertility awareness and also to help women to get that opportunity to learn all of these things that no one teaches us about our menstrual cycles and our fertility. And so I've received so much positive feedback, and I'm just so happy to know that I can be part of your journey. So thank you for allowing me to do that. And one of the goals that I did have when I started this podcast was to create a community of women who can support each other while learning to chart. So similar to what I had when I first started charting. And so I've created a Facebook group. So it's the Fertility Friday Facebook group. If you go to fertilityfriday.com/community, you'll be redirected to the group. And so you just have to make a request to join, which goes to me, and then I'll approve you. And so keep in mind this group is in the initial phases, and my hope is that with time, we'll be able to build a thriving and supportive community of like-minded women who will be able to help each other as we understand and gain confidence using the fertility awareness method. And so as always, if you enjoy today's show, please stop by the show notes page and leave a comment. So you'll find all the podcast episodes at fertilityfriday.com/podcast. And you can also find me on Twitter at fertilefriday. And if you've been enjoying the show, I would absolutely love it if you would take a moment and leave a review and rating on iTunes. So this just helps to move the show up in rankings, and it also helps more people to find it when they're searching for things. So it would mean the world to me. So getting down to business, in today's show, I'm very happy to welcome Jennifer Neff. So after going off of hormonal birth control, she began charting her cycles with fertility awareness, and somewhere along the line, she was also diagnosed with PCOS. And so today, she's going to share her story about what her experience has been learning to chart, and also what it's been like coping with a PCOS diagnosis while at the same time trying to conceive. So I know that many of our listeners will be able to relate to Jennifer's experience, because I know that many of you are kind of in the similar boat, having maybe recently come off of hormonal contraceptives, maybe trying to conceive, and also maybe just in those initial stages of learning what fertility awareness is all about. So without further ado, welcome to the show, Jennifer.
Great. Thanks for having me, Lisa.
I'm so happy to have you today. So I kind of briefly went over what your experience was, but I'd love for you to just maybe tell the listeners a little bit about yourself, and also what motivated you to start your blog, which I didn't mention in the intro, which is Living Positive COS.
Yes. Well, thank you for the introduction. You gave me a good segue. So a little bit about me. I am a 28-year-old female who spent much of my adult life on hormonal birth control, just a pill, contraceptive. I probably spent, I would say, around 10 years on the pill. And really, honestly, and kind of embarrassingly, have to admit that I wasn't really aware of my own fertility and the way my cycles were working, quite frankly, because I didn't have to be with 10 years on a pill that more or less did it for me. It wasn't until recently that once my husband and I decided that we were ready to try and have a baby, that I really became more aware of fertility in general, how my body works specifically, and what my goals were specifically. So about this time last year, honestly, I decided to go off the pill, and that has been an interesting journey, I should say. And from there, you had mentioned also I was diagnosed with PCOS, which I imagine we can talk a little bit about later. But between getting off the pill and being diagnosed with PCOS, I found the fertility awareness method, and truly it's helped to be almost, I would say, just it's provided me with a little more control in what feels like sometimes an uncontrollable situation, and has just really opened my eyes to all things fertility. And today I feel a lot better than where I was even a year ago in being aware of my own fertility. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Well, so what after, well, you mentioned that after 10 years of being on the pill, it was kind of around that time when you were ready to start trying to conceive, that that was kind of the motivation for going off the pill. So I'm kind of curious, now that you've been off the pill for about a year, do you notice any differences between, I guess, when you were on the pill before and now? Did you have any side effects, or were you one of the lucky ones who didn't really experience a lot of side effects while on the pill?
Great question. And actually, yes, I did experience side effects while on the pill, excuse me, but really honestly didn't realize it until coming off of the pill. Um, I, you know, I would have everything from really intense migraines to, weight gain or weight loss. I think I switched pills a number of times, all with, me going really how it starts is, hey, I'm feeling this kind of side effect, going into my doctor, and the doctor says, it must be your birth control pill. Why don't we change the hormonal dosage and see what happens? And then it was from there, just kind of dealing with or coping with another side effect specifically. Um, in the past, I would say 5 or 6 years, I was working a pretty stressful job, and accredited initially these migraines to maybe it's my workload. And when things let up and I switched careers, I would still continue to get these migraines. And my doctor at the time was, well, maybe it's a menstrual migraine, and kind of thought with the dip in hormones during my placebo week that possibly that was the reason for migraines. And it almost just kind of became something that I was just used to, and then coming off of the pill just to really feel, you know, free from that, free from migraines, and, having a steady number and weight and not having it flux one way or the other, just, really kind of opens my eyes even more so to the effect that the pill was having on my body ultimately.
That's really interesting that you say that. I did an interview with Holly Grigg-Spall,
Hmm.
who wrote Sweetening the Pill, and one of the things that she talks about in her book is just how common it is for women to be experiencing certain things while they're on the pill, but the pill is absolutely not what you're attributing those symptoms to. So
Right.
even though you were
Right.
having those migraines, it's just, you don't really put two and two together to think that one causes the other. Um,
Oh, exactly.
so
Until until you go a completely different direction, you're like, huh, I wonder. This is probably the case of the reason why I was feeling these.
Well, so then I'm interested to know, so you haven't been on the pill then for a little over a year. How many migraines have you had? I mean, not specifically, but I guess in general.
The ones that I would used to feel, and honestly, I haven't had a migraine since stopping my pill, which yay,
Wow.
hooray!
Not one.
But not a single one, and even so, it just, not even so much stress, headaches, at all. And it's been amazing. Truly, it's been amazing.
That's really interesting. And I think any of the listeners who, happen to relate to that and, they're on the pill and they have migraines or they were, I think that's I mean, it doesn't mean that every single woman is going to never have a migraine if you go off the pill, but it's
Sure.
really powerful to the thought that that actually could be the cause of it if you are having
Exactly.
them.
And I mean that the word migraine is used so loosely, so I'll kind of describe a little bit more what I was feeling at the time. My migraines were debilitating completely. I mean, I could feel them coming on, and I would get, if you've ever had a migraine before, I describe it as like a white lightning in my vision. So my vision would be impaired, and I would just have to immediately unplug from whatever I was doing and go to a dark room. And I would have to lay there for the rest of the day and hope that I could come to the next day. It was nauseating. It was, oh, the worst. So if you've had a migraine, you can totally relate. But I mean, and to say I would have them, I would say, definitely 2 or 3. serious ones each year, in addition to, common headaches with a dip in my pill with a placebo week. But to say that I haven't had a single one since, it's been amazing because those are terrible.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And my guess is that medication didn't really work so much if you, especially if you had to kind of close yourself off in a dark room.
Oh, yes, exactly. Just lay down, don't bother me. I need to ride this out.
Okay, well, other than the fantastic side effect of not having migraines anymore,
Yes.
what was that process like for you coming off the pill? Was it scary? Did you have anxiety about it, or were you excited? How did you feel?
A little bit of everything, honestly. We had decided this time last year, that I was going to stop taking my pill and that we were ready to put a baby in our lives and kind of, it's interesting. I mean, for somebody who I would say, looking back now, a year later, that I wasn't as in tune with my fertility and the reproductive cycle in general. And now, feeling that I am confident in that. At that point, it was kind of like, okay, well, I talked to my doctor. We had this preconception, appointment, and doctor said that even though I've been on my pill for 10 years or so, that it would be no problem. Go ahead and start taking a prenatal pill. The day that you decide that you want to stop taking your birth control pill, take a prenatal, and within a few months your cycle should regulate, and bam, you should be pregnant. Like it's this magic thing that just happens. And for granted, some women, that's their experience, and that's awesome. But for me, it wasn't. And it was everything from being emotionally frustrated and devastated and upset to really trying to figure out my game plan and how I wanted to tackle handling my fertility, taking charge of it, and really deciding which path I wanted to go down as far as trying to conceive. So, um, yeah, it was interesting just on a high level. So, and I don't know if this is the point where you'd like me to talk about specifically, what that looked like for me.
Well, yeah, one of the questions I was going to ask you to kind of get us into that a little bit more
Mhm.
is how long did it take you after coming off the pill before your first period showed up?
Sure, great question. So, it was about 45 days until I had my first bleed, which now I think is more just a withdrawal bleed because there wasn't any ovulation. And, that could have been indicator number one for me with PCOS, which we could talk a little more specifically a little bit later. But to answer your question, so it was about 45 days after stopping my pill that I got my first bleed, I'm going to say.
Hmm.
And then from that point, it wasn't until another 6 months later that I had another withdrawal bleed. Well, as a credit to going to my OBGYN at around like month 5 or 5.5, I went in and said, "This isn't normal. It's been, a number of months. What's going on? Can you help?" And at that point, my OBGYN, took some blood tests, and they did an ultrasound, a vaginal ultrasound, and really confirmed the PCOS diagnosis. My testosterone levels were high in blood, and also there was lots of tiny little cysts on my ovaries. The common phrase they like to use is a string of pearls on my
Hmm.
ovaries. So lots of tiny little cysts in there, and not really any dominant follicle that was really going to set ovulation. So at that point, my doctor had decided, why don't we try some progesterone in hopes to, kickstart your cycle and help you bleed and hopefully jumpstart the process of ovulation. So I had another withdrawal bleed about 6 months later after stopping the pill, didn't ovulate. And then kind of from there is when I really just, decided I'm kind of at a fork in the road. Do I want to continue with the assistance of, synthetic hormones and drugs, what I just came off of, or do I want to maybe turn and try something different, more of a holistic approach, and really see if I can get down to the root of, what is the underlying problem and how do I want to address this, and kind of go from there. And the biggest question for me in deciding that was, how quickly do I want to have a baby? I mean, I felt like at that moment in the doctor's office, I could have said, I want to have a baby like yesterday, and instantly I would have been prescribed, all of these fertility drugs and whatnot. And fortunately, my husband and I, we aren't in a rush to have a child. It's obviously something really exciting and something that we're working towards, but we want to do it as naturally and as holistically as possible. So from that point, I just kind of switched gears and found a naturopathic doctor, acupuncturist as well, and really set in on this holistic journey to wellness. And since then, I've had success in having my cycles begin to normalize. I have ovulated, and that's without any of the synthetic drug assistance, which was my goal from the get-go.
Oh, that's amazing, and that's very hopeful. Um,
Yes.
and so, what were some of the things that? So you mentioned that you started to work with a naturopathic doctor, and you mentioned that you're also working with an acupuncturist. So, I guess what were some of the suggestions that you were given, and what were some of the steps that you took to kind of work towards regaining that healthy ovulation?
Definitely. And I'll kind of start from my first appointment. It was, I hadn't had any experience necessarily up until that point with naturopathic doctors, with acupuncture treatment, or with any really of the herbal formulas or anything like that. So I was really coming into a completely blank slate. I had brought my diagnosis and my paperwork from my OBGYN, and really did find, I did some research in finding, an individual who was aware of PCOS and was aware of fertility, and kind of bringing that whole mindset and mind frame to my case. And from there, the first session, I mean, we didn't do any kind of acupuncture treatment or anything. The first session was really just a download of information in which he asked everything under the sun, from what's in your diet and what's your exercise like, how regularly is your sleep cycle, are you stressed, what's your work, what's work like for you. He also asked questions at the time that I thought were weird. For example, how often would you say that you've been on antibiotics, in a given
Mm.
year? Things like that. Things, pulling what seemed for me as a blank slate individual, things that are completely random. I didn't understand how they were coming in together until, we started to develop a plan, and, he started to explain reasons why he's asking these questions. For example, trying to pinpoint, is there something happening, in my intestines that isn't allowing my reproductive system to operate optimally? Because, in the anatomy, the intestines and reproductive system are right next to each other. So if one isn't working the best, or impacting another organ, it's almost a domino effect that's going to impact something else in there. So
Mm-hmm.
it was certainly, and I'll keep using the word holistic because that's what this was for me. It was really understanding how all these different elements in my life all work together that, attribute to potentially how my reproductive cycle was operating at the time.
Okay. Were there any specific dietary changes that came out of it, or any lifestyle changes, or I know that in your blog you talked a little bit about yoga, and so what were some of the things that you actually changed, that maybe even things that you didn't even think of that would need to be changed?
Certainly. And from this point in from this point in my fertility journey, it was really shifting, from an immediate goal to looking at the whole picture. So I like to say there was mind, body, and spirit changes, if you will. So first, mentally, kind of getting my mindset right. I was just educating myself like crazy about PCOS specifically and what that looks like for all different types of women. And, educating myself in what are my options, and what are my goals. My husband and I had, a conversation about timing and what timing would look like for us in our journey to conception. And, really just educating ourselves about all the different paths to hopefully having conception happen. So that was step number one in, a mind perspective, just getting my mind right in the education. Step two was definitely some changes with my body and, what treatment ultimately was going to look like for me. And treatment still for me is a combination of a lot of things. Number one is diet, and how, just really being thoughtful about what I'm consuming and understanding. And it's been definitely a learning curve of understanding how certain foods impact me and my body. I understand now that I have a slight gluten intolerance, and that when I do eat gluten, I'm definitely off balance, if you will. And with that, so being really conscious about, making sure I'm eating a wholesome diet, that I'm eliminating gluten, just really trying to stay on the straight and narrow, as they say, with my diet specifically. In addition, there's exercise. And yes, I did recently make a post about yoga and the benefits specifically in fertility in women who are trying to conceive, how helpful yoga can be, and different exercises for your body and different poses for your body. Yoga itself, we could talk as a whole other podcast episode about the benefits of yoga in general, but specifically for fertility, how great it's been. It's truly a mind and body practice. So that's been helpful, especially in reducing stress with the exercise. And then also, so we have the acupuncture treatment itself that I've been doing, and that's coupled with herbal formulas. And my specific, my formulas change depending on where I am in my cycle. So my acupuncturist may recommend a certain type of formula, and truly I wish I could share what that formula is, but all I can say is that it's traditional Chinese medicine, and that formula just really varies on what the goal is for trying to get my cycle to either regulate, to ovulate. It just depends. But what I can say, at least for the listeners who are curious, the constant herbs that have been the same for me since this journey definitely have been Vitex, or it's also known as chaste tree, and as well as cod liver oils. So the Vitex ultimately helps with that cycle regulation. It also helps to keep, your temperatures high at post-ovulation, as well as cod liver oil. For me, definitely, it's been helping with healthy eggs, ultimately helping to make my ovaries healthier. So that's step two, is the body aspect. And then step three would be a spiritual aspect, and definitely has been a change. It's a constant struggle as a woman trying to conceive, to balance not being stressed, because on one hand, you are so anxious and excited about it, and about conceiving, and you want it to happen, today or any day. But it's a fine line, because you want to eliminate your stress and not get frustrated with the process, not get frustrated with asking questions like, why isn't it happening for me? And why, is it happening for other people? And why am I given these challenges? Continuing to ask yourself the why question, instead of shifting your focus to just being content and allowing yourself to be an observer in your body and taking on a spiritual approach to it. And for me, that's the way that's looked is through the blog. That my blog is a very therapeutic outlet for me to really just kind of record and digest and provide just observation in my body, and just helps to, like I said, be an outlet for me dealing with the emotions and things that kind of come along with this journey. And as well as my blog, I also practice meditation. And on my blog as well, I've linked in some different quick meditative examples of just really making sure that my mind is in the right space and not allowing myself to stress. Because in one of my recent posts, I talked about how stress has definitely shifted my cycles around, and how I can see how stress plays a huge role and in making sure that everything is normalizing. So to kind of come full circle here, I've definitely taken on a mind, body, and spirit approach to conception and this journey as a whole. I know that was a lot of information.
Well, I really like what she said, though, and I think it's a really nice, refreshing, balanced approach. And what I like is that you're not going about it in one particular way, that you're really kind of looking at it holistically, as you said, mind, body, and spirit. And what you described is a process. So it's not something that, okay, I'm going to do this, take this thing, and then everything will be fine. It's a
Right.
process, it's a journey, and it sounds like you're just kind of doing everything in your power to make the journey as positive as it can be. And it also sounds like you are patient in this process. Well,
Yes.
because the way that you described it, it sounds like you're kind of taking it in day by day. And so I think that that's very admirable, especially because it is stressful when you're trying to conceive and it's not happening as quickly as you thought it would. I think few things in life could be as stressful as that.
Yes, thank you.
And so one of the questions that I wanted to ask you as well was, at what point in this process that we've been talking about, at what point did you find fertility awareness, and how did you first discover it?
Great. And I'm glad that you gave that perfect segue. So, in really helping to, well, I had mentioned at the beginning of the interview that fertility awareness has helped me find a little bit of, and I hate to use the word control, but it really has helped me find a little bit, I'm going to use it. It's it's helped me find a little bit of that control in what seems like an uncontrollable journey. Although I've made myself aware and I've educated myself and I've done the changes that I need to in mind, body, and spirit for this approach towards conception. Honestly, it's nature, right? And how often do we have control over nature? We don't. So fertility awareness has helped me feel like I'm contributing a little bit and helping to not control, but just helps me contribute and helps to give me a sense of empowerment, if you will, in this journey that feels a little uncontrollable and feels like it can be, you can be powered by it. So I found fertility awareness method pretty early on, I would say, and I was aware of it definitely prior to going to being diagnosed with PCOS. I picked up the book, of course, Tony Reschler's infamous book, Taking Charge of Your Fertility, excuse me. Picked it up, but really just kind of, once I decided I was taking a holistic journey, really made a point to understand it, research it, and practice it. And I will say that I feel like I've had a little bit easier of a time in really transitioning from birth control pill to fertility awareness method, because I don't have the lingering, I would say, I don't know, scare, or I'm not trying to avoid, I'm not trying to, I should say, use it as birth control. So in that sense, I feel like it's really enabled me to be an observer and kind of, exactly day by day observe what's going on. And I feel like I'm in a safety net, if you will. And it's been a great transitional period for me to use the fertility awareness method, because the method is all about that. It's observing your body and allowing yourself to do that and, understand the signs that your body has provided to you. So I think in this sense, it's certainly helped me. It's given me some time to feel comfortable and confident in using the method, so that, when I am ready to use the fertility awareness method as a birth control option for me, that I know exactly what I'm doing. I know the signs that my body has provided to me. I know when my fertile window is. I know, you know, all the things that you would learn coming off of, any kind of method and switching to the fertility awareness method. I feel confident in that sense. So yeah, it's been great taking an observatory role, I should say, and glad that fertility awareness method has helped me to do that.
I think it's a kind of a unique position in a way to be in when you're, just like you said, when you're first learning the fertility awareness method and you don't have that added layer of difficulty and fear when you're specifically using it for birth control. It's a little bit different when you're learning it for birth control, because at the first few months for you are just kind of, you're just figuring it out, no pressure. But for a person who's using it for birth control, those first few months, you have to be pretty vigilant with an alternative birth control method until you are actually comfortable with everything that's going on.
Exactly.
So I like the way you described it, because by the time that you, like, as you mentioned, by the time that you are ready to take it on and try to use it as a birth control method, you'll have all of this practice and all this awareness and understanding about your cycles. And so that's a really great place to be when you're kind of flipping the switch and using it for birth control.
Exactly.
One of the things that, in your case, though, can make it challenging for using fertility awareness, and I think anyone who has recently come off of hormonal contraceptives and perhaps their cycles aren't like clockwork every 28 days, as we're all told that they're supposed to
Hmm.
be. How did you find trying to learn the fertility awareness method? You mentioned that you went 45 days before your first bleed, which you identified as a withdrawal bleed, and then it wasn't until 5 months and then 6 months that you actually had another bleed. So during that time, it can be a little frustrating because you're kind of waiting for stuff to happen. Nothing's happening.
Exactly. Exactly. So, and just to clarify the question, Lisa, are you asking um, how I started to track and what I started to pick up on things during that time?
Yeah, a combination of that, and I guess what it was like, because Tony Weschler's book is very, you read the book and then you have expectations about what your
Exactly.
chart is supposed to look like. I read the book as well, and that's how I first started charting. And as soon as you read the book, you have very specific expectations of what your cycle is supposed to look like. And
Absolutely.
when your cycle doesn't look like that, it can be. So I just,
Frustrating.
yeah. So
Yeah.
I guess a combination of what your experience was like with that.
Great. So, yes, I too had expectations of, oh, well, great. Now all I have to do is just know when I'm ovulating, and I can understand when I'm ovulating, when my cervical mucus looks like this, or when my basal body temperature is this, or when my cervical position is this. But then jumping into it, it was a whole learning curve within itself. So, and I would say, as a woman with PCOS, the way my cervical fluid looks may be different than the average, but I say that with a grain of salt because, there isn't necessarily a model female and how all your cycles should look, and you already alluded to that. So for me to delve into that a little bit more, I regularly have cervical mucus that looks fertile in any given cycle. I've got um, it was a learning curve in trying to understand, what specifically of that is actually fertile. So, in Tony Weschler's book, and most things that you read out there, the cervical mucus, when it's fertile, can be anything from like a lotiony and a creamy to a wet and a slippery, or just a wet and stretchy kind of quality. So for me, that was the biggest learning curve, was understanding, what my fertile quality cervical mucus look like and when in my cycle that was happening. And to be honest, it happens on different days in my cycle. I've been charting now for about, three-ish, 4 cycles, but really being aware of the cervical mucus specifically for a while now. So it looks different at different times in the cycle for me. And truly, and allowing myself to be that observer, and also curious to see if this method was working, because I just want to be sure. I was also using ovulation predictor kits just to, absolutely make sure that this was a fertile window or a fertile day for me. In, first identifying, okay, what does my cervical mucus look like? What is my temperature? Has it shifted? And then let's check that with an OPK, an ovulation predictor kit. And if necessary, let's look at my cervical position as well. So all of these things kind of, fell into place with me little by little. It took a while for me, definitely a full cycle. And in my case, that's pretty long usually, of just understanding, just recording what I was observing from cervical mucus, from my temperature, my cervical position, and then kind of from there, in retrospect, saying, okay, based on this information that I have here, and maybe potentially this test that I took that was positive in ovulation, this was my ovulation day. Let's try the next cycle and see if it's similar, and see, and if it's not, what's different, or, were there similar things that were happening with other things in my body, for example, having breast tenderness, or, feeling lethargic, or things like this, that, I'm starting to line up to identify where my fertile window is, and if indeed I did ovulate that cycle.
Mm-hmm. And it's depending on the perspective that a person is basically charting from, whether you're trying to conceive or whether you're trying to avoid, it's very different. So I could when you were describing your process and using the ovulation predictor kit, and also you're describing that your cycles are quite long, like long between ovulations,
Yes.
especially because of the PCOS diagnosis. So when a woman has a really long cycle, you could have mucus cycles. You could have mucus there, and then kind of goes away, and then mucus again, and then it kind of goes away, because your
Exactly.
body's trying to ovulate, and the hormone levels just aren't getting to the point that they need to actually sustain and create a healthy ovulation. But if you're trying to avoid pregnancy, all of those days you have to consider fertile.
Exactly.
So then when you're trying to avoid, there can be so many days, quite a few days that you actually have to be considered fertile. And that can be frustrating on a whole different level.
Indeed.
And in your case, you're trying to pinpoint when is the actual ovulation, because uh, because obviously you're only looking for the one. You have to make sure that if you're going to try, it's going to be on that day. So I think that that's something interesting to point out. Uh, but I guess where I'm going with this as well, because it's very interesting, and I think a lot of women can learn a lot from just listening to the process that you've gone through. But how would you say that this knowledge has, I guess, changed your perspective of your own body, um, and also kind of increased your own sense of knowledge and empowerment about where you are in this process?
Sure. And I'll actually give you an example that kind of highlights, how how confident I feel in the fertility awareness method, and, combining all these things with cervical mucus, the temperature checks, and, your cervical position. Um, and how confident I am in that is because of, y- y- well, I'll give you this example, and then I'll kind of come back to that. So in this last cycle, actually, I had perfect cervical quality mucus, for me, what
Mm-hmm.
that was. And it was definitely, that kind of wet and stretchy. It was pretty classic. It was textbook, which I was really surprised by, because my case specifically hasn't been textbook just about anywhere under the sun. So I said, oh, okay, well, maybe, potentially I'm ovulating this day. Let me check the temperature. Temperature checked out, cervical position checked out. It was, as they say, show, right? It was soft, high, and open. I thought for sure I ovulated that day, so I decided, you know what, I'm gonna double check this with a test and confirm it. And sure enough, the test was positive. Here we go a few days later, and I'm noticing that my temperature is starting to decrease, which is contrary to, if you indeed did ovulate, that your temperature should remain high above your cover line. And mine was just falling. It was falling well below my cover line, and I thought, okay, that this isn't normal. I don't think then that I ovulated. Let's wait a little bit longer in the cycle. And sure enough, I mean, it was a very long, it was a very long wait. This last cycle was, I would say, close to 70 days. And when I got my false positive, as I'm calling it, was probably about day 38, somewhere around there. And could I confirm ovulation until about day 60. So it was a lengthy process. And again, you alluded to patience, and yes, it's been a patient process, but, allowing yourself to be an observer, to just simply record, it helps to eliminate the stress out of it. And then also when you're using such a tried and true method like fertility awareness, that, if you don't have these signs that check out, then just, wait a little bit longer and see what happens with your body. Can you confirm it a little bit later? So I've definitely found comfort in fertility awareness, method. And for that reason alone, that I can say, no, I didn't ovulate on this day. And in fact, I ovulated this day because these indicators check out, and they didn't they didn't before. So I feel it's helped me to feel confident in understanding and interpreting the signs that my body is providing me.
I think that's such an important example as well, because ovulation predictor kits have their place, but it's important to know what they're testing for. And so they're not, in your case, as you described, they don't always correspond exactly with ovulation. They're testing for hormones that are released that indicate that ovulation is coming. But it obviously, as you said, in your case, that was a false positive because they're not 100%. And I think that's really important for women to know. And after, my own experiences with fertility awareness, I would actually probably feel I would feel more confident in the temperature, but that's only because of my own experience.
Right.
And because as you could probably attest as well, after you have a few cycles, you start to feel more and more confident. So you can imagine how confident you'd be after, I don't know how many cycles I've done. Who knows? 1,000. But after getting the that temperature confirmation over and over and over again, after you chart your cycles for years and years, it's a different type of confidence and a different type of understanding that you start to really have with your body.
Exactly. And it's such a, not to not to be super crazy here, but it is a beautiful process. I mean, I think back to like middle school was probably when I received my last formal reproductive health education, if I could even call it that.
I was thinking that when you said that.
I just remember being, like 13 years old, and I had a male science teacher, and I just would cringe every time he said the word penis or vagina, and that was my education on it. And from there, it was, thankfully Google was available to me during, when I was becoming, more sexually active and aware of reproduction in general. But I found my information through Google or like anonymous phone calls we have Planned Parenthood, here in the United States, and just really informal and embarrassing. And I blog about that too. It's just that it took me till I was 28 years old, really, to truly give myself a true formal education and allow myself to understand the signs that my body was providing to me. It's just, yeah.
Well, I'm 32, so I'm 4 years older than you. So when I was in high school, I didn't have a computer in my house. And I didn't, I don't even, honestly, I don't remember where Google was at that stage. Like, I don't remember, but that was not how I got my education. So I was thinking about this the other day, and I was really fortunate, actually. I used to listen to the Sunday night sex show when I was a kid. And like really quietly in my bedroom.
Yes.
Because my parents were absolutely not okay with me listening to it.
Yes.
And
Yes.
all I can say is how blessed and fortunate that I was to actually have access to that,
Oh my
because
goodness.
it was accurate, it was non-judgmental. It was
Right.
always very, the safe sex angle was always very much reinforced.
Mm-hmm.
And so, one of the things that I've spoken about in some of the previous podcasts I've recorded is like, what's up with the lack of STI information? Everyone's saying women need to go on hormones, and that's basically
Right.
the only STI education or the only sex education we're getting is go on the pill.
Right.
And when I was a kid, it was all condom, condom, condom. So what happened to the condom?
Uh,
We need to bring back the
exactly.
condom.
Exactly. You're
um,
absolutely right.
yeah, and then when
It's a
I went
disservice.
exactly. And then when I went to university, I remember buying a book about sex because that's what I did back then. That was what I was that like I was the same as you. Like I need to get myself an education, so when I bought a book. So
Yes.
the
Yes.
teenagers and the young people kind of growing up in right now, and everyone listening to this podcast right now, this is a really great time that we're living in because you can Google anything and you can, I mean, it's not always the most accurate information, but
Sure.
you have access to way more at your fingertips than I ever did.
Exactly. Exactly.
So, kind of going back to fertility awareness, one of the questions I wanted to ask you as well was, what aspect of the fertility awareness method did you find the most challenging as someone who was first learning it?
Sure. And I've kind of already talked a little bit about cervical mucus and, what that meant for me because, what's textbook wasn't textbook for me. And it was a learning curve and understanding certainly what my cervical mucus was indicating to me. And I will say on that note that, really doing my research and understanding my own cycles and, again, comparing data from one cycle to another has helped me interpret those better. But also, and thanks to you, actually, Lisa, I was able to connect with Colleen Flowers. So shout out to her.
Awesome.
She lives like 15 minutes away from me, which
Seriously.
is phenomenal. I know. And at the end of your show, when you provide how can you contact this person, I was like, no way. So I immediately got set up in one of her classes for natural conception, and she has made herself available to be a resource. She is very well versed in the fertility awareness method for using for birth control and for obviously an option for natural conception. So finding resources and creating a community for myself where I'm not embarrassed to ask these questions, that, I had cervical mucus that looked lotiony this day, but then it looked stretchy this day, or it was dry this day. What does it all mean? So there's plenty of people out there who want to help you understand what your body and the signs are telling you if you're stumbling. And I would say that through this journey alone, that's really helped me to find my voice in that, and reaching out to others and resources to say, hey, I don't have all the answers. I don't know what's going on, but, can you help me interpret this has been helpful. So to answer your question, definitely one was cervical mucus was a hurdle for me. Another one was the temperature checks. And I mean, for me, and probably for a lot of the listeners out there, I don't wake up at the same time every single day. I wish that I did. And I wish it was after the sun rose most days. But unfortunately, real life doesn't always allow for that. So the temperature checks were a little bit tricky for me. I was initially checking, at random times when I would wake up. I wake up, in any given week, sometimes at 5 o'clock in the morning and sometimes at, 7:30 or 8 o'clock in the morning. And then the weekends is a whole other story. So really kind of regulating that and how I was checking also specifically. So I did get a specific thermometer that checks BBT, and you can get those on the internet or anywhere at your local drugstore, perhaps. So I was using that thermometer, but I was just immediately popping it into my mouth. And, I live in Denver, Colorado, and outside can be anywhere from below 20 degrees all the way up to 80 degrees. And, the temperature in your room alone obviously affects the temperature of the device that you're using to check your body temperature. So what I started doing, and I believe that this is part of, you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong, but part of the Justice method and checking your BBT is, and I know that I've heard on a previous podcast on how to do this of yours. So I'll take my thermometer and really just kind of stick it under my armpit and set it there for about 10 minutes so that it has a chance to kind of regulate and adjust to my body. And from there, then I'll check my temperature. And I try and check it on the days that I know that I'm going to consistently be up at the same time and or within an hour of that window so that I can give myself accurate data. So again, to answer your question, that was another one of the challenges that took me a few cycles to really learn, because, you know, I was having this huge sawtooth, if you will, just up and down in all of my temperatures. And, you know, it was until I asked myself these questions of, you know, well, am I giving myself a consistent platform to check my temperature every single day? No, was my answer. And then it was, okay, then how do I give that to myself? And it was just really, truly simple tweaks in order to give myself that steady platform to check my temperature. So to answer your question, cervical mucus and temperature checks were my hurdles, but as I explained how I overcame those.
Well, I think that's I'm really glad you brought that up, because cervical mucus, I think, tends to be the most challenging aspect, especially when you're first learning, because cervical mucus can look a lot of different ways, and it's you expect it to look like it looks in the book, and honestly, unless it takes a little while to really get a sense of the different types and how it can look and what a fertile day looks like versus a day where you're not fertile or a dry day. And also, you wouldn't think there's so much to taking your temperature, but there actually is something to it.
Yes.
And so one of the questions that I actually received an email from one of my listeners recently, and I think it's a concern that a lot of women have when they're learning fertility awareness, wanting to have additional support, but not necessarily wanting to pay somebody, because it can seem really expensive, and it can it also feels like this is like this personal empowerment thing, like you read the book and you really feel like you're doing it yourself. So and I think that there's no right way to learn the information, but there is a benefit from learning around people who have experience. And so I can't even say, oh, I learned totally on my own, because I literally learned to chart among a group of women, some of whom were fertility awareness educators and some of whom were just like me, just learning.
Right.
And you think you know stuff, and you do, but when you're around somebody with years of charting experience plus training, there's always something that you learn. So from your experience working with Colleen and having the ability to have somebody clarify some of those questions that you had, what would you say to somebody who's concerned about that expense of actually like trying to find someone to help them learn to chart their cycles with?
Sure. That's a great question. And well, I would say that first, you know, the internet is free. And like we talked about before, there's any and everything under the sun in there, and really you have to confirm what that, you know, what kind of message you're getting is true, or, you know, if it's going to work for you. So I guess I would start there and really trying to understand, you know, what your cervical quality mucus is looking for. There's lots of great forums out there with, you know, with women also who lots are going through similar experiences, maybe similar to your case. I know specifically for PCOS, there's a whole forum that you can get involved with and reaching out to other women in that way. And for me also, I've reached out recently to lots of girlfriends, and specifically with PCOS, really kind of understanding now that more women than I'm aware of have PCOS specifically, but kind of opening up that conversation to them. So if you're looking for free methods, so to speak, just check your resources around you first. If, you know, that fails, or you're not looking for that, or you're maybe looking for somebody who really is qualified in providing you those answers, I would ask a question in return to say, you know, how much is it worth for you to understand this information? You know, a doctor's visit, I would say, with a copay in the United States is anywhere from, oh, I don't know, $25 to $80 US. And you know, usually when I leave a doctor's office, I feel like I don't have as much information as I could find somewhere else. I feel actually worse off. And, you know, that I don't have any of those options. So in that sense, I justified, you know, a class, and the class that I took was $60, and it's an infinite resource to me now. So it was just a matter of weighing, you know, how much I wanted to invest financially in this and what the resource was I was going to get out of it. And I think, you know, for the listeners out there who are perhaps just starting the fertility awareness method or have those questions and aren't sure where to turn, people, obviously, you and I and the community that you've started, we love to talk about this in our experiences. So I think all you have to do is just commit yourself to researching a little bit, and you will find what you're looking for probably a lot less money than you imagine. So don't let that be a hurdle, I would say.
Yeah, I think that's great information. And the only thing I would add is that, of course, it's money and everyone's situation is different. But the good thing about fertility awareness method is that you don't have to keep going. It's not like I had to go to a chiropractor because I threw out my back. And the thing with chiropractors, you kind of always have to get maintenance. Like you kind of have to keep going, and that's fine because I'm happy to, because I like feeling good.
Sure.
But with fertility awareness, once you learn it, you learn it. And so, yeah, if you're not having trouble, this doesn't really apply to you. If you happen to have one of those cycles that matches the book, it's pretty easy. But if you don't, you can benefit a lot, even in, you know, a couple months, like, you know, a couple cycles. So that's something to keep in mind, because it shouldn't be this ongoing expense. It depends. Some women do have to have an extended, I mean, every woman's situation is different. So when you have different medical concerns or fertility concerns, of course, some women will end up having longer kind of duration of their sessions. But like I said, you know, it's just something to consider. So
it's a great call out. Exactly. It's not an ongoing thing. It's likely a one-time purchase, if you will.
And then you have free birth control forever. Just putting it out there, because it's pretty awesome. Like my birth control line on my budget is $0, and it's been that way for 12 years.
Yeah. Exactly.
It's pretty awesome. So just to wrap up today, just a couple questions to end the show. One of the questions that I wanted to ask you is, so if you could go back and talk to yourself, maybe 5 years ago or something like that, when you were on the pill, now that you have this additional knowledge, having one of those, if I knew then, if I knew now, no, if I knew then, what I knew now, what would you tell yourself?
That's great. Well, and specifically talking to fertility and birth control in general, I would first tell myself, Jennifer, use your resources and educate yourself about, you know, the reproductive cycle in general, and specifically how your cycles work, and really just kind of gain that basis of information. You know, even though at that point in time, even still understanding, you know, that I wasn't ready to conceive, that's okay. Still understanding this is how the cycles work. And I'd also ask myself to research, you know, what it's been like, the process for women coming off of birth control pill and trying to conceive. Because as I mentioned before, I was in this like fantasy world, and, you know, had credible people, doctors telling me, you know, it's going to be fine, and within a matter of months, it's going to be okay, and you'll have a baby in your arms before you know it. And, you know, just encouraging myself then to research, you know, and understand that may not always be the case, so that I could, you know, mentally prepare for a journey that can be stressful. I definitely just tell myself to use those resources. I'd also encourage myself at that point to begin questioning the pill and question, you know, if that was the option for me. even though my doctors were switching the hormonal dosage, but just really, I would have encouraged myself to challenge using that only as my birth control method. That, even though it was easy, really look at, what it was doing to my body from a holistic perspective, maybe sooner, plugging in the migraines that I alluded to before and connecting it with these hormones that I'm putting into my body, in addition to everything else that's going on. So, I would have encouraged myself to challenge uh, or just research truly different methods of birth control at that point in time. So hindsight's 2020, as they say, but more education in specifically fertility and the way I was using it is what I would tell myself 5 years ago.
That's great. And one last question. If there's one thing about fertility awareness that you could tell every woman, what would it be?
Great. I would just say, really, allow yourself to become the expert of your own body. Don't, necessarily, don't let anybody else be the expert of your body. I'll stand by that really firmly. Doctors do have great advice, and there's lots of people out there who have great advice from a natural perspective or from, a typical Western perspective, if you will, but they aren't you and they aren't observing the things that you are in your body. So really just trust yourself and allow yourself to be that observer because it will come together, you know. And with that, I'll also say, be patient with your body. Our bodies are always changing. Our hormones are always fluctuating. The stress in our lives is always changing. So be patient with how and where you are in your life. And, know that that's connected to your body and what your body is telling you. Just take the time to listen to and observe the signs that your body's providing you and become that expert so that you can advocate for yourself and not allow someone else to do that for you.
I love that. Take control of what's going on with you.
Do it. Yes.
Okay, well, where can our listeners find your blog and learn more about you?
Yes. So my blog is on Tumblr. It's Mrs. MRS Jenny Neff at tumblr.com. And I imagine, Lisa, that you'll link that in there.
Yep.
I'm also available on Facebook, Jennifer Neff. I haven't met another Jennifer Neff yet, but hey, maybe they're out there. And I'm also on Instagram. I think there's a connection to my blog itself, but my email is Jenny. It's spelled Jenny, the letter C like cat, .neff, my last name, at gmail.com. So if you're looking for just a resource to chat things about, I am by no means an expert, but I will help you in that research and share any knowledge that I have with you. So feel free to reach out.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for being here today, Jennifer. Thank you for sharing your story. And I'm sure that there are so many women listening that have had similar experiences, and I think your perspective is very refreshing, very honest, and I think it's really going to help a lot of women who are listening today.
Thank you, Lisa, for the opportunity. It's been awesome.
Thank you for listening today. If you enjoyed today's show, please share it with a friend. You can find me on Twitter at Fertile Friday or stop by the blog and leave a comment in the show notes for today's episode, which you'll find at fertilityfriday.com/29, so /29. You can also find me on the Fertility Friday Facebook fan page, which is facebook.com/fertilityfridays with an S. And as I mentioned at the top of the episode, I've just recently started a Fertility Friday community on Facebook. So go to fertilityfriday.com/community and you'll be redirected to the Facebook group. And of course, if you've been enjoying this podcast and you've been enjoying these episodes and getting something out of it, I would absolutely love it and really appreciate it if you would leave a review on iTunes. Of course, a 5-star review wouldn't hurt, but I would really appreciate it just because it helps more people find the show, and it also helps to kind of move Fertility Friday up in the rankings. And of course, the whole purpose of this is to spread the word so that more people can have the opportunity to learn about the amazing joys of fertility awareness and all of the other fertility related things we talk about on the podcast. So thanks again for listening. And as always, until next time, be well and happy charting.